This unfolded in just a little over 5 hours yesterday after a Florida judge, who's a Trump administration appointee, struck down the mandate for masks on public transportation. Then by 6 o'clock last night, we had all these viral Twitter videos of people ripping their masks off on planes. Were you surprised by how quick this all went down?
Yeah, I was a little surprised actually, because there was a different lawsuit. I think more people were watching, one that was filed by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a well-known, critic of pandemic mandates, and other Republican-led states trying to overturn this mandate. But this ruling came out of left field from another case that had been filed earlier by a nonprofit organization. So it did kind of come out of nowhere. And like you said, the ball started rolling with these mandates being lifted by the companies and the transportation authorities, but the judge had already struck down the mandate nationwide, so there was only so much that they could do if they wanted to continue to have a mask mandate. They might have looked to the Biden administration, for a signal on an appeal, but we haven't heard anything about that. So the writing maybe was on the wall, and they just started dropping them right away.
And staying with you quickly, can you explain to me how a judge at the state level was able to issue a ruling that had such a vast impact on not just what we do federally and domestically across the country, but on the decisions of these airlines as well?
Sure. It's actually fairly common these days to have a district judge. It's a federal judge in a state appointed by a president to issue. Usually it comes in the form of an injunction, like a preliminary or permanent injunction against a policy. But in this case, the judge actually just skipped any kind of trial or hearing and just struck down the entire mandate without a trial, and just went ahead and made it apply nationally immediately. There was no chance to really save it at that point without an appeal. So it's pretty common. We've seen these types of nationwide injunctions issued in all kinds of other types of situations, whether it's immigration or things of that nature. So these are fairly common, but it was a little bit unusual the way that it came out, according to some experts I've spoken to.
Well, Dr. Moorjani, I want to bring you in here to talk about the health impact. How concerned are you about what this change in mask mandates and requirements could do in terms of the case counts that we're seeing here in the U.S. and also globally?
So good afternoon, Madison. Yes, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Yes, I think, indoors, in an indoor situation, where transmission does occur, and now that the virus has become even more transmissible, it has become more infective, and we are starting to see another upswing in COVID-19 viruses across this country. I think to do away with mask mandates in public transportation does not make medical sense to me. We do know from previous studies that indoors, in close quarters where people cannot be 6 feet away, where COVID-appropriate behavior short of mask mandates is not possible, that transmission does occur. So what we are doing here is in public transportation, where we have people who are unvaccinated, we have people who are incompletely vaccinated, we do not know their vaccination status, everybody has access to public transportation. We are doing away with mask mandates that have been the cornerstone of controlling this COVID-19 pandemic. We know that vaccination is ultimately the cornerstone for all control of COVID-19 pandemic. But then when you cannot enforce vaccine mandates in public transportation, then your next best bet is a mask mandate to protect people who are traveling in close quarters. They cannot be more than 6 feet away. They're actually, next to each other in some of these cases. So I disagree with the doing away of the mask mandate. I'm not a legal expert, and I don't get into politics of it, but from a medical perspective, I think vaccinations, mask mandates, and COVID-appropriate behavior are the three cornerstones of control, and those decisions must be based on local issues and in specific instances like public transportation, not on a national level.
Well, let's talk about the local issues, because international travel is going to bring its own slew of questions and confusion here. United, for example, is allowing you to take off the mask domestically, but if you're flying into a country like Hong Kong, you're going to have to mask up. Sticking with you, Doctor, to what extent does the kind of shifting guidance impact the public's ability to follow along with public health measures? In your career, how have you seen the shift in guidance impact individual behaviors?
So Madison, you're absolutely right. This is going to create a lot of confusion. And that's where tempers can fly when people say, well, I heard that this is what I have to do. And now suddenly the person whose job it is to enforce that mandate on an international flight is going to have to face this. So, from many, many different aspects, I think the execution of this rolling back of mask mandates in public transportation in the US is going to have far-reaching implications. And I encourage everybody at an individual level that when you are indoors, wear a mask if you can, and for as long a period of time as you can. Because that is, of course, we know a 70% reduction in transmission.
Does that stay the case, Doctor? Sorry to jump in here, but does that continue to be the case even when you're on an airplane and you're sitting really close to someone? Is it still a 70% reduction?
So airplane is a little bit different than a train or a bus or any other close quarters. Why? Because airplanes have this continuous air exchange going on through HEPA filters. And not only that, the air circulation in an airplane is vertical and not horizontal. So the likelihood of someone getting an infection from someone sitting next to them, unless they're at close quarters and touching and breathing into each other's face, is unlikely. So there are ways of mitigating COVID transmission on an airplane, which is not possible elsewhere. And so I think airplanes, much less, but still possible. We've seen transmission on airplanes before. And we are going to see transmission on airplanes again without mask mandates. We had literally shut it down. But now I think with the mask mandates being taken away in public transportation, you will see a contribution to COVID cases in the United States.
Yeah, I hear you talking about the implications this has. And Erik, I want to go back to you on that because I wonder how this judge's ruling could influence the CDC's ability to change course on masks if, for example, we see another big wave like we saw with Omicron.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And a lot of that will hinge on whether or not the government decides to appeal this ruling. If they do appeal and they go, for example, to the 11th Circuit Appeals Court and then to the Supreme Court and they lost this case, then of course that would set a pretty bad precedent for the CDC going forward. But this really does going to answer the question of whether or not the CDC has this authority to issue a mask mandate at all. It seems like something that the CDC should be able to do if you think about it in a pandemic. But this judge is saying that the CDC exceeded its authority, that the law that the CDC cited when it issued this mandate simply does not support this. And a lot of technicalities involved in that decision that some have been criticizing. But at any rate, we will see potentially another surge, and it's possible that the CDC could get around this ruling by issuing a brand new mandate, perhaps trying to address some of the concerns in the judge's ruling. If, for example, giving the public more of an opportunity to put comments in and things of that nature, because this was struck down to some extent on a technicality because it didn't meet this law called the Administrative Procedure Act because not enough people got a chance to comment on the rules. So it's pretty technical, but it is something that potentially the CDC could get around if it did a whole new mandate, if the need arose, if we did have another surge like you mentioned.
And I want to go back to you, Dr. Moorjani, as well here. I'm curious about the impact that this could have on those unvaccinated populations. When we think about folks who've already bought tickets for a trip next week and they're planning to fly with a 3-year-old who's unvaccinated, should those people be canceling their trips?
No, I don't think it should go that far. I think if you're going to go on a trip and you already booked your tickets, and first of all, everybody that is eligible for vaccination should get themselves vaccinated. That is by far the most effective tool we have at controlling the pandemic, the current COVID-19 pandemic. That's one thing. Two, if you're going on that trip and you have an unvaccinated person, like a 3-year-old, then I think if you adhere to COVID appropriate behavior as much as possible, if you're on an airplane, turn on your ventilation, your individual ventilation, and direct it to your forehead. That acts like a buffer and does not allow external viruses to come in and infect you. So the likelihood of you getting an infection in an airplane, if you have your mask on, if you're vaccinated, even though you have a 3-year-old infant with you, is much less, provided you take all the measures that are available to you. Be careful at airports. Mm-hmm. Airports is where transmission can occur as well. So let's not forget that.
Right, especially if, like me, you may frequent the airport bar. That's really good advice. I didn't know about the dealing with your AC as well as a potential hedge against the spread. So that's really good advice. Erik, I want to ask you quickly about the Biden administration's role here. Yesterday, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki called the judge's ruling disappointing. I wonder if you consider that wording to be that it was disappointing from a public health perspective, or was it disappointing politically because the Biden administration wanted to be the one to say, hey, masks are over, give us the points for that? What do you take on
Well,
that?
honestly, it could be interpreted both ways. I'm sure that any president does not like to see a high-profile policy under their administration struck down like that, especially one that has been, frankly, so politically divisive. In a way, it's been too politically divisive. I think we could probably all agree. And some legal experts I've spoke with have said that a law like this should never have been so politicized to begin with. That he said that really people were wearing a mask. It was either that meant that you were pro-Trump, and if you are anti-Trump, and if you took a mask off, it just was too many allegations of virtue signaling and things like that. The experts would say, let's bring it back to what is constitutional. Let's look at the Constitution. Does the CDC have the authority to issue this mask mandate? And would a different judge, frankly, have come up with a different ruling? This judge has been, was deemed to be not qualified by the American Bar Association before she was named to the bench during the Trump years. She's 35 years old. She hadn't had enough experience to get an ABA qualification. She clerked for Supreme Court Associate Justice Clarence Thomas. So she's seen as being very conservative, and it's very convenient for the Trump-supporting folks that she got this case, frankly. And who knows if another judge would have come up with a different ruling, but it's the ruling we have. And I think the administration is just going to have to think real hard, clearly, about whether or not they want to appeal this, given the realities of the court system the way they are right now.